Okay? Now, when it's over Asia, for instance, they do have recorders on board that we can get some coverage, record the data, and then when it comes over our antenna, we can dump it. Or there are a series of 14 ground stations around the world where Argentina, for instance, has a ground station where they're collecting data from our satellite, paying us for those data, and then they distribute it to their science community in South America. I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you break down solar reflectance into various bands of light energy, we can separate those bands of energy and highlight certain features in the infrared or thermal band. For example, we can take 3 bands. This happens to be over the near Los Angeles areas, just to highlight certain features, make them stand out more dramatically, and we can evaluate the data more effectively, we hope. A near natural view of the area. Los Angeles is here, but the geologist in me says, look at this. That feature right there, that's the San Andreas Fault. Okay? And notice up here, another one coming down at a junction. There, that's another fault structure that the geologists and urban planners look at very carefully as they plan their cities. If we want to separate, Matthew, if we want to look at the vegetation, different band combination to look at forested areas or croplands. Remember, we can do this anywhere in the world. Okay, what can we learn from all this? That's really the payoff, not how many satellites we have up and all that business, but what good is it? I'm sorry, I have to say this, and if you've seen the Earth from Space exhibit, I think you've noticed the same thing I'm talking about, how beautiful the planet is. There are areas that are phenomenal. And this is by far the most widely reprinted scene in our archive. Northern Siberia in the summer months of the Lena Delta. Now, where did we get this image? It's from our satellite. We processed it. And a couple of years ago, some of us who get pretty jaded looking at satellite images a lot said, you know, some of these are kind of like art. They're not really art. It's not, you don't have an artist and the graphics and the plastic arts and all that business, but they're pretty views. And we put together a series of 80 satellite images called Earth as Art. Forget the science, they're just Earth as Art. And you can download those images from a site that I have right here. I have some brochures if you want to look at them. They make great screensavers too, by the way. The geologists just hate it when I say things like that. We have to stay with science.
Another question. You said that was a thing in Siberia.
Yep.
What if the Russians don't want you to be taking these pictures? Can they block you?
No. The worst that could happen is China, has the capability of knocking satellites out. They've demonstrated that recently. But all countries, up until recently with one exception, had signed an agreement that allows us to collect pictures over their countries. Open skies approach. The one country was Libya. And of course, we honored that. I have to say that. The real reason is, with 30-meter resolution, smallest feature you can see is 30 meters, there's virtually no military application. It's more Earth resources. The one exception, now I'm going to be candid with you on this, is during Desert Storm and Desert Shield. The military came to us and said, okay, we know about the 30 meters and all that business. Can you see any changes along the Kuwaiti border? And we saw these massive excavations about every 200 meters right on the border. And what was happening was Saddam had moved his tanks down there, opened areas so that tanks could be about 2 to 3 meters below the surface, for the bulk of the tank, and just the turret would be sticking up. And those poor devils in those tanks were sitting ducks, because we could identify each of those excavations where those tanks were. And the military took that data from there. That's the only, in my 35 years in the business, that's the only military application I know of. And what I wanted to do, I was happy that we were able to destroy the tanks, obviously, but I would have liked to have had a chat with the gentleman who made the decision to put those poor devils in that vulnerable position. Change over time. China. The Three Gorges Dam. Here's before, and here's as the dam was starting construction, and you can see how the reservoir is being filled. We're monitoring that, and the United Nations Environmental Program is monitoring that, because that may have turned out to be an environmental disaster. The repercussions are still being defined, but it's destroyed in an attempt to build power supplies and to control flooding. It's destroyed the habitat. It has had a major, profound effect on water quality, and something like 4 million people have been displaced for it. We don't make the decision. We provide the raw data for those who do. Bolivia. You think of Bolivia forests as solid, and in 75 they were, but by 2000, the deforestation of the Amazon basin. And that is really significant. And I'm not getting into the political discussion or economic discussion as to whether you ought to clear the forests, but I've always thought of forests as flat. They're not. There are a lot of hilly, sloped areas with a very thin soil profile. If you clear the trees out of there and you get a lot of rain, what happens to the soil and what happens to downstream water supplies? So you get into complex issues, but you start with the basic information as to how has it changed. The RLC in former Soviet Union, side issue, second largest lake in Asia at one time. Upstream, they started irrigation programs that drained the water that fed the RLC. Right here was a military plant for biological weapons. And it was safe. It was out in the middle of the sea. Look now. There's a land bridge to that island, and there is no security protecting that former biological weapons plant. The Soviets were quite interested when we showed them that image. Las Vegas, this is kind of blurry, and I apologize for that, but in 73, relatively small city, now fastest growing major metropolitan area in the country. And the city planners need these images to say, okay, where do we need to put schools, highways, ambulance services, fire services? It all feeds into that.
And you are mentioning population from this, because several books have said that the way it's going to destroy the planet is overpopulation, where people can't be fed.
Two issues. You've got the population, then you've got the food supplies. Years ago, I probably shouldn't mention this example, I worked on a project with the Iranian government when the Shah was still in power. And Tehran is separated, Tehran, the biggest city in the country, is separated from their major food production area by the Elborz Mountains on the other side, up by the Caspian Sea basin. And so the Shah's government said maybe we can use these satellite data to see where we can set up irrigation systems near Tehran to grow food to feed our population and to protect that food supply. It's closer to our population. And so we were over there helping them find where the groundwater would drain off the Elborz Mountains using the satellite data.